Welcome, everyone, to the Olive Grove podcast. This is where we take the sources you send our way and we really get into them, pulling out the key stuff so you can stay informed without, drowning in information.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive based on the excerpts you shared from MCS Obadiah, Pride and Consequences.
Right, Obadiah. It's super short, the shortest book in the Old Testament, actually. And we don't know a ton about the prophet himself.
True, he's a bit of a mystery, but the message, wow. It's all about pride, its consequences, and it really spans time, past, present, and looks ahead too. It's surprisingly relevant.
Absolutely. The source material, the study itself, it sort of walks through Obadiah chapter by chapter. It's mainly this prophecy against Edom.
Mm.
But what I found interesting is how it constantly links it back to, well, things we see today, and it offers these spiritual reflections alongside the historical stuff.
Yeah, it connects the dots really well.
So our aim today is pretty straightforward. Help you grasp that core message about pride and what comes from it, drawing directly from the study of Obadiah, maybe uncover a few surprising insights along the way.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Maybe Obadiah 1 and 2?
Perfect. So right off the bat, the study points out this is a vision from Adonai Elohim, a direct message about Edom.
And there's this rumor, this message spreading among the nations, let's go attack Edom. It's like a call to arms is already out there.
And then God's declaration hits hard. I am making you the least of all nations. You will be beneath contempt. Oof. Strong words.
So very strong. And to get why, the study dives into who the Edomites actually were. They're descendants of Esau.
Right. Isaac's firstborn.
Yeah.
Jacob's twin brother. Jacob, who becomes Israel. So these are related peoples. There's family history here.
A complicated family history. The study brings up that famous story from Genesis 25, Esau selling his birthright to Jacob for, well, basically a bowl of soup.
Yeah, because he was starving. Right. But the study highlights how that act showed Esau didn't really value his inheritance.
Exactly. And it says that's where the bitterness, the strife between the brothers and later their nations really took root. Esau despised Jacob after that.
And it wasn't just that one event, was it? The study reminds us about God's word to their mother, Rebekah, even before they were born.
That the twins would become two separate nations, and the older Esau would serve the younger Jacob. So destiny, or maybe divine purpose, was already shaping things.
That context is definitely key for understanding the judgment against Edom later on.
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly to verses 3 and 4, where the study says, the real charge, the core issue, is laid bare. Pride.
Yes, capital P, pride. And it wasn't just an abstract thing. The study shows how it manifested physically. They lived in these cave dwellings high up in the cliffs.
Right, these natural fortresses. It gave them this sense of, well, invincibility. The study quotes their attitude, who can bring me down to the ground?
Like their physical elevation made them spiritually arrogant, too.
Precisely. The study draws that connection very clearly, this physical high place reflecting a spiritual lifting of oneself above God. It describes it as an attitude that says that we have the ability to live without God. That's self-sufficiency.
Wow. And the study even compares this kind of pride to Satan's original rebellion, wanting to be like God, leading to being cast out of heaven.
Yeah, it puts Edom's pride in some pretty serious company.
Oh.
It also mentions the Tower of Babel from Genesis 11.
Ah, right. Another example of humanity trying to make a name for itself, reach the heavens on its own terms.
Exactly. And just like God scattered people from Babel, the study emphasizes God's clear statement here. He will bring Edom down despite their high perch, just like he dealt with Satan's pride.
So the fall is inevitable. Then verses 5 and 6 describe how complete that fall will be.
Yeah, the study uses this really vivid analogy. It says, even thieves, they might leave a few things behind, or grape pickers, they usually miss some grapes.
Right. There's usually something left.
But not with Edom. The destruction would be total, so thorough that nothing significant would remain. The study really hammers home the finality of it.
And it makes that powerful point. Look around today. Is there a nation of Edom? No. They're gone as a distinct people.
The prophecy was fulfilled completely. It's quite sobering.
Then chapter 7 throws in a twist, doesn't it? The betrayal element.
The study explains God would actually use Edom's own allies, probably the Babylonians, who they thought were their friends or partners, to bring them down.
Talk about irony. Those they were at peace with, the ones they shared meals with, those are the ones who deceived them, set a trap.
And the study notes Edom couldn't even see it coming. They lack discernment, perhaps blinded by that very pride we were talking about.
It just keeps compounding, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Obadiah 8 and 9.
This section focuses on the failure of Edom's supposed strengths, their wisdom and their military might. God declares he'll destroy the wise men of Edom.
Leaving Mount Esau, another name for Edom's territory, without understanding, without discernment when they needed it most.
Exactly. And their warriors, their heroes, in Timnah, a key Edomite city. They'd be filled with terror, paralyzed by fear, leading to mass slaughter.
So much for invincibility. It's this stark contrast the study keeps highlighting, their self-perception versus God's reality.
Precisely. Which leads us into verse 10, where the study starts to unpack what it calls the consequences of pride. It lists 5, starting with violence.
Violence. The study suggests proud people or nations often use force to conquer, to maintain their status, to get what they want.
And it connects this directly to Edom's actions, their violence against their brother Jacob, Israel. This historical aggression, fueled by pride and old resentments, is cited as a key reason for God's judgment via Babylon.
And the ultimate result, Edom disappears.
Yeah.
Gone.
The study then makes that contemporary link, suggesting, maybe a lot of the conflict we still see in the world stems from this same root. The pride of leaders, of groups, making real peace seem impossible.
Until Jesus returns, as the study notes from a Christian perspective. Okay, what's the second consequence listed?
That comes from verse 11. A lack of concern for others, especially the weak, the vulnerable, the suffering.
How did Edom show that?
Well, the text says they just stood by, aloof, while foreigners raided Jerusalem, carry off its wealth, even cast lots for its people. And God's verdict, according to the study, is damning. You were no different from them. Their inaction was participation.
Wow. Just standing by. That leads into the third consequence in verse 12, gloating.
Yeah, basically taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune instead of showing compassion.
Yeah.
Edom didn't just stand by. They apparently rejoiced. They looked down on Judah's disaster.
Yeah.
Spoke arrogantly in their time of distress.
That feels particularly ugly.
It is. And the study brings it close to home, doesn't it? Drawing parallels to maybe tendencies within the church, sometimes secretly feeling pleased when someone struggles or gossiping.
That's challenging stuff.
Definitely makes you think. Okay, number 4, verse 13. Dishonesty and stealing. Specifically, the study points to Edom seeing Judah's fall as a chance to profit, entering the city gates on the day of their calamity to seize their wealth, their treasure.
Taking advantage of the chaos for personal gain.
Right. And again, the study connects this to modern behavior, individuals or businesses exploiting crises, like pandemics or disasters maybe. That same predatory instinct fueled by self-interest.
Okay, and the fifth consequence, verse 14.
This one's presented as really the final step, actively aligning with the enemy. The study interprets this as ultimately siding with Satan's purposes.
How did Edom do that?
The verse says they stood at the crossroads to cut off fugitives, handing over Jacob's survivors to the enemy. It wasn't just passive anymore. It was active participation in destruction, betraying their own kin to the conquerors.
That's the ultimate betrayal.
It really paints a grim picture of where unchecked pride can lead from arrogance to indifference to malice, and finally to outright opposition to God's people and purposes.
So after laying out these consequences, verses 15 and 16 talk about judgment, right?
Exactly. The study flags the phrase, "The day of Adonai is near for all nations." This isn't just about Edom anymore. It's a universal principle. And the key principle mentioned is reciprocity. As you have done, it will be done to you.
What goes around comes around, essentially. What about the drinking imagery?
Ah, yes. Drinking on God's holy mountain, then the nation's drinking. The study interprets this as a metaphor for experiencing God's wrath, his judgment. It also connects the idea of drinking or drunkenness in the last days, mentioned in Revelation 6, to people desperately seeking escape, maybe through substances or other means.
But finding no real escape from what's coming, the study notes even death won't be a refuge then.
Yeah, a very sobering image of judgment.
But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? Obadiah 17 and 18 seem to shift focus.
Right, there's a contrast. The study highlights God making a distinction. On Mount Zion, representing God's people, there will be deliverance, a holy remnant who escape.
Unlike Edom,
the house of Jacob, Israel, will actually repossess their inheritance. And they're described as a fire, while the house of Esau, Edom, is like stubble, consumed completely. No survivor left for the house of Esau.
And the study links this restoration and deliverance ultimately to
the coming of Jesus Christ, the deliverer promised from the line of Jacob.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the book, verses 19 to 21. What's the final picture?
It's one of ultimate victory for God's people, and the establishment of God's reign. Edom is defeated, the land is restored, boundaries are expanded. It signifies a complete reversal.
And the study sees a bigger picture here too, right? Beyond just Edom and Israel.
Definitely. It suggests this foreshadows the time when the ultimate pride that of Satan and his followers is finally dealt with. It points towards the end times, referencing the 1,000-year reign of Christ described in Revelation 20.
Where, as the verse says, the kingship will belong to Adonai, God's ultimate authority is established.
A powerful conclusion to such a short book.
It really is. Okay, let's just pause our conversation right here for a moment. We're back on the Olive Grove podcast. Before we jump back into summarizing Obadiah, just wanted to mention something quickly. If you're looking for connection and, a place to discuss things like this with others, we really encourage you to check out the My Christian Space community online.
Yeah, it's a great spot. Supportive people, good discussions, definitely worth looking into.
And speaking of support, we also want to give a shout out to Enduring Freedom Ministries.
They're doing some really important work. They have this goal, this vision to establish a food pantry right in Jerusalem, Israel.
Yeah, providing essential food support for folks there, families facing tough times in, such a significant city.
Absolutely. It's a really practical way to show care and make the difference.
So if that resonates with you, if you feel maybe a nudge to help out, please do consider praying about it and maybe making a donation to Enduring Freedom Ministries. Every bit helps them get closer to that goal.
For sure. You can find details on how to support them on their website. We'll make sure there's a link in the description or show notes for this deep dive.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting us share that. Now, let's circle back to Obadiah and kind of recap the core themes we pulled from the study, especially around those consequences of pride.
Right. So even though the source detailed verses beyond just the initial ones, when we think about summarizing the impact of Edom's pride, as the study lays it out, we saw it wasn't just one thing. It was this pervasive attitude.
Rooted in their perceived security, their self-reliance.
Exactly. And that pride, as the study outlined through verses like 10 through 14, it manifested in concrete, harmful ways. Violence against the relatives.
That lack of concern, just standing by during Jerusalem's crisis.
The gloating, taking pleasure in their brother's downfall.
The dishonesty, trying to profit from disaster.
And finally, actively siding with the enemy against their own kin. It's quite a list.
It really is. And the study consistently frames these actions not just as bad choices, but as direct results of that foundational pride, setting Edom up for the judgment described later in the book.
Yeah, and contrasting that sharply with the hope and restoration promised to Jacob, to God's people, despite their own failings at times.
So wrapping up our deep dive into these excerpts from MCS Obadiah, Pride and Consequences, the big takeaways seem pretty clear. Pride is destructive, whether in a nation like Edom or, in us as individuals.
It has these ripple effects, these consequences we've discussed, violence, indifference, malice, and ultimately the study emphasizes it invites judgment.
But Obadiah isn't just a warning, is it? There's that underlying message of God's justice, yes, but also his faithfulness to his people and the promise of eventual restoration and his ultimate reign.
Absolutely. It's a message of warning, but also one that points towards hope and the need for humility.
It definitely leaves you thinking about how sneaky pride can be, how it can show up in ways we don't always recognize in our own lives or communities.
For sure. It's a timeless challenge.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening, something to chew on. Considering these really potent warnings against pride from Obadiah that we've talked through, how can we personally, and maybe in our churches or groups, how can we actively watch out for its influence, guard against it, and instead try to cultivate more of that compassion, that justice, that humility the book implicitly calls for?
That's a great question to sit with. How do we live differently?
Yeah. Well, if this deep dive sparked your interest and you want more discussions like this, please do subscribe to the Olive Grove podcast here on YouTube. We'd love to have you join us regularly.
And don't forget to check out the My Christian Space website. You can often find early drops of our deep dives there, plus connect with that community we mentioned.
Thanks so much for tuning in and exploring Obadiah with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.